As open source contributors, as open source maintainers, as members of the open source community, and as software engineers, we ask a lot of questions to our peers and to people on the internet. It is an inevitable part of the process of software engineering, and it is inevitable within open source communities as well. So, hi, and welcome to this session on how to ask good questions in open source communities. I'm Navendu, and before we dive right into the topic, let me introduce a bit about myself. I work in open source full time, and at my job, I maintain Meshery and Service Mesh performance at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And I also mentor Google Summer of Code and the Linux Foundation mentorship program interns or mentees who take part in the Meshery and the Service Mesh performance projects at the CNCF. And about you, I'm guessing like you are either a person who's just starting to contribute to open source projects, or you might even be a veteran or a seasoned open source contributor, or you might be an open source maintainer. And if you don't fall into any of these categories, I'm sure you are a user of open source software. But all of that doesn't matter. So you are very welcome here if you are interested in asking better questions. Uh, so if you are here, I think that you are interested in asking better questions, and this is the thing that I asked myself a while back when I was trying to refine my process of asking questions, and while I was taking notes on how I ask questions, and taking notes on how I refined my process to ask better questions, and how I formulated the results, and how I'm here in front of you to speak about what I think can help you ask better questions. So yeah, let's go right ahead into the topic. And before we start to answer how to ask better questions, let's take a step back and come to a consensus on what are good questions. So, in my opinion, I think like this is definitely something that changes across scenarios, so across situations. But in general, what good questions are is good questions are the ones which are easy to answer. So uh, our goal while asking a question is to get answers. So we are asking questions to our peers, or we are asking questions to people on the internet, hoping to get an answer that can either unblock you, or that can give you some clarification into and help you proceed further. So good questions are the one that are very easy to answer, and a series of good questions back to back good questions is the key to a good answer. Uh, so more often than not, you don't get everything you want from just one question. So following up your question with multiple questions, which are also formulated well, which are also good, is the key to getting a good answer. So to give a concrete example on what I mean, these examples, all of the examples in this presentation are from my experiences, are from my experience, and are real interactions I had. So if if a person asks what happens when we strip the binaries, that can be a vague and a broad question, and the person answering can have a hard time, and they can go off on a tangent and answer you back with some irrelevant details uh, on stripping a binary and how it affects the performance, the size of the uh, uh, how the debugging information is not included in the binary, and uh, all in all, you don't get the answer you want. So instead of doing something like that, what we do when asking good question is to limit the scope of a question to be very specific, and to give some context to the person answering, so that they can they can get a clear idea of what you intend to extract from them with the question. So formulating your question in a clear manner, in a easy to answer manner, can get you quick answers, can get you the exact answer you want from the person answering. So this is an example of such a question. So let's look into uh, let's look into the problem we have with bad questions. So what's wrong with bad questions? What's wrong if you ask uh, vague and underspecified questions? So what I have found is asking bad questions often results in either the person explaining things that are very irrelevant. So, like in the previous example, the person can go off on a tangent and ask and explain things that are that are very out of scope in your question, that are very that are not that's not really what you wanted to extract from them. So they can get you back with some irrelevant details, and the conversation may not be productive at the end. So you both of you end up wasting your time. So that is a result of asking a bad question. And the another result is the person can start explaining things that you have no idea, no clue about. And this is especially painful when you are when you are new to the open source project, or when you are new to the community, and the imposter syndrome really kicks in. So you might think that the person may be explaining the right things, but because of your ignorance, or because of your lack of experience, you are not understanding what they are mentioning, what they are talking about. So but more often than not, this is not the case. Uh, and the person explaining mm, might be overlooking your question, and they might be answering things that are again completely irrelevant, and that are out of scope of your question, and that are out of scope of what you wanted to get from them. And another interesting result is the person explaining what you already know. So if you ask things that are way broad and underspecified, they might start explaining things that you already know. And depending on the scenario, like this might be okay, because you can check to see what if your foundational understanding of things are correct. But in most cases, what this does is both of you will end up wasting your time going over things that you already know. And yeah, instead of getting to the actual question you have, you end up circling around things you already know. And that can that is a hindrance to your productivity, that is a hindrance to your time. And the final result, and probably most the most devastating result, I guess, is the person not answering the question at all. So if you ask bad questions, then the person on the other end either might be a really busy guy, or might not have the time to sit with you and talk for an hour on all these things. But instead of and I think instead of asking a a good question, a very specific question, if you ask a really bad question, the the person might not even reply back to you. And I have found this happening very much in open source communities, where send you DMs asking very broad questions that might be already been documented, or that might have already been answered, or yeah, you get the point, right? So if a person asks such questions, they are usually met with a a brick wall, and the conversation doesn't really proceed after that. Yep, but that with that said, like this doesn't happen really often, but this does happen, and uh, all of this boils down to you and the other person walking away frustrated without a clear answer and wasting both of your time and both of your efforts. So an important thing while asking questions is to understand who you are asking questions. So you might be asking directly to your peers, the people who are within your open source communities, or you might be asking questions to people on the internet, on internet forums like Stack Overflow or GitHub issues or GitHub discussions or any other such platforms. So an important thing you should ask yourself here is does the person have context to what you are asking? Uh, so let me break this down, and let's take into consideration uh, when you are asking questions to your peers. So your peers peers are people who are working on the same project as you are, and they will have a lot of context on the project and on the things you are trying to do. So it is important that you are at the same level, you are at the same foundational, you have the same foundational knowledge to build your question upon. So if the other person, the person on the other end doesn't really know what you are trying to do or doesn't have the context on the question you are asking, it will be very difficult to answer. And what you need to do is to provide enough context so that the other person can answer the question really easily. And when this comes to online forums like Stack Overflow, you may need to provide a bit more context, because the person on the other end will have very less idea of what you're trying to do about your project and about the things surrounding the piece of code you put on Stack Overflow. So uh, giving enough context is definitely necessary, and it making sure that you both are on the same page regarding that foundational knowledge, regarding that context before asking questions is really important. Another important thing is time. So when do you ask questions? Like, is there a specific time to ask questions to people? So uh, all of this comes into either of these two categories. You can either schedule a time or you can ask questions right away, and this definitely depends on the scenarios, and this definitely depends on what you're trying to do and how your community is structured and everything. So there might be specific times in your open source community where people meet and ask questions. So if there is a project office hour or a community meeting or a development meeting, these are good times to bring up your question, or you can schedule time with the project maintainers or your other peers to ask questions. So this is especially useful when you are asking questions, when your questions take time to answer. So if you have a lot of things to ask, it is better to schedule time to make sure that the person answering is also available and it's also free to answer your question, uh, and they can focus on answering your questions. And asking right away is also a really good choice if it saves a lot of time for you and the other person. So if you this could be one of questions that can straight away clear a lot of things up for you to proceed further. So it kind of depends on the scenario, but it is important to make a mental note on mental note on whether you are asking the questions at the right time. And this is a rule of thumb that I follow every time I ask questions in public, in open source communities or in public forums. So it is generally to don't ask questions that are answered by the first result of a Google search. So basically, what I mean here is that if your questions are not very specific to your particular niche, or if they can be answered by let's say searching on Google, or going through the documentation, or referring to any previously published public material, uh, then you should definitely try that instead of asking someone else to do your homework. You should definitely do your homework and try to answer these questions yourself before asking this to others. And if you don't do that, what it does is it shows a very little effort on your part. So basically you are trying to get others to do your work, so you haven't put in the work to answer to ask that questions. And yeah, and that often comes across as a really bad vibe on your part. And Googling things, or going to the documentation, or any such process can also help build the foundational knowledge for you to reformulate your question. So even if you have a question, if you dig through, if you dig through documentation, if you dig through the code base, or if you dig through the searches, your Google search, uh, you can build a foundational knowledge. So maybe you can, with that gained knowledge, you can reformulate your question, and you can build on top of what you just learned, and ask better questions. And this is a really good way to ask better questions. And it is that simple. Is that right? So this particular question can be plugged in to check your understanding of what you already know. So you state what you already know and ask, is that right? So what this does is what this does is it helps you build the conversation on what you already know. So you have a starting ground, you have a baseline to come back to. And you and the person answering both know that there is a ground truth, and you can build your conversation, you can build your questions from that point. And you can also so the pro with this question is you can get yes or no answers. So those questions are really cool as well. So coming back to our previous example, we plug in an is that right in the question, so that the other person can vouch for what you understood. And they can ensure that and you can ensure that what you understood is correct. And a key characteristic of a good question is they are precise. So instead of our questions being vague, try and ask precise questions. And the more precise your questions are, the more easy is it to answer your question. So limiting the scope of your question to what you really want to know, or what you actually want the person answering to explain, uh, the better it would be for the other person to actually answer it quite easily. And it prevents the other person from going off on a tangent, like the example we showed before. With a really underspecified and a vague question, what happens is the person can talk about things that are way off topic, that are tangential to what you actually want to know. So asking precise question is the key here. And as I mentioned before, you can ask yes or no questions while formulating something like is that right? And what this does is you can get really fast answers, and you can get those fast answers quite easily. And it is quite easy and a low effort for the other person to answer your questions as well. And looking at an example, if someone asks, how do I use a kind cluster setup in my development environment? The straightforward answer is to point that person to the kind docs. And the person might have already tried it, and it doesn't work. So their exact question, the way they formulated their question is not right. They wanted to ask something else, but they didn't formulate it right. And because of the conversation being async and over it's let's say chat platforms or even mailing lists. This does not work really well, and a lot of things are even lost in the interwebs. So instead of doing that, if you make your question more precise, if you limit the scope of your question to one particular thing, the other person can really answer your question very easily. So they can directly provide you the answer that you couldn't find elsewhere. And yep. So ask precise question and try to stop being vague. And yeah, so this also helps give the other person a lot of context into what you are answering, what you are asking. And that in turn helps with answering the question in a much easier way. Another example is mentioned here. So this is an example of asking the yes or no type questions. So if you are if you are formulating this question uh, like I show here, it will be really difficult, and the person can start explaining or start blabbering a lot about what this whole gRPC middleware would entail. But instead of that, if you dig through what this is, and if you dig through what has been implemented, if you put in a little homework, you can get a straightforward answer, which is yes. So uh, I think this might very well relate with the newcomers here. And this is something that I have struggled a lot with when I first started contributing to open source projects. So when someone answers my questions, I often find myself in doubt, and I prevent myself from asking more questions to clarify what they mean, because I think I think I am not very well versed in the project, or I don't have an understanding of the project to understand what the other person is talking about, or it might be because of my lack of experience. So all sort of things that typically gets your imposter syndrome going. So instead of that, ask more questions. So if you get an answer that and you are not satisfied completely, instead of preventing yourself from asking more questions, you can say what you don't understand. So uh, if someone answers, if the answer you get uh, is good, but there are specific parts you don't understand, make sure that you clarify with the person answering. And ask more clarifying questions if you are not satisfied with the answer, and if the answer the answer uh, made you think of more questions. And yep, that is definitely how this process evolves. So you will keep on asking questions, and uh, after a lot of questions you get the answer you want, and that is how you extract information from the person answering. So ask more clarifying questions. And if the speaker is explaining quite quickly, and if the and you are not following him, it is okay to stop them and ask more specific questions. Or if they are going off on tangents, it is okay to stop them uh, and turn them around with some specific questions. So this can help make sure that the conversation stays on the track and it doesn't get derailed. And throughout all this, it is important to remember that imposter syndrome is real and everyone faces them. But the people around you want to help you. They want to help. They want to answer your questions. So always make sure that you remember that, and keep that in mind while you ask questions or while you are interacting with others in the community. And my final point here is learning in public. So open source projects have discussion forums, chat forums, or mailing lists that are often public, and anyone in the community can directly access them and go through their conversations. And yep, so basically they are completely transparent. And learning is in public is something that every open source contributor, everyone in the open source community should 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 try to force themselves to do, and should try to make it a habit. So asking questions in public channels instead of DMs is the best way to do that. So if you have, so while you are asking questions, while you are while you are clarifying your doubts, or while you are in any discussion, ask questions in public channels instead of sending direct messages to the maintainers or your peers. And there is a catch here that it may not work in every situation. Like if you want to ask personal things, or if your conversation is maybe if it is confidential, then it is okay to DM. But it is a general rule of thumb. If you think the conversation can benefit others, definitely use public channels. And what this does is helps to document the discussions publicly, and other people can jump in and answer. So you don't need to you don't need to you don't need to necessarily ask one particular person. You can ask the entire community, and people who know the answer can come in and help you. And the other people who are on the same boat as you can learn from your discussion, and you can even point people to this discussion in the future. And instead of having to answer it again, you can point people to this particular conversation. And my final point is that asking good questions is a skill, and like all skills, it takes practice to sharpen it. So what I did while formulating this process is that I try to apply this in real life in open source communities, and I try to urge other people to do this as well. And it has definitely changed how I ask questions, and it has become a more of a habit now. And I have found great results with this, and this has helped move things a lot quicker. And while so so working in a really distributed team, this has helped a lot with my async conversations and conversation through text format, like through chat and email. So this has made my life a lot better, and it has really helped me helped me with my productivity, helped others in the community as well. So to finish off, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now in the chat box. And you can also hit me up on Twitter. My username is sudo Navendu, and feel free to hit me up on Twitter, and I'll try to answer your questions there as well. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the events, and I'll see you guys.